Let's begin our talk of today, acute infections in pregnancy and lactation. I will be speaking first. Alka ma'am will be taking the second part. So, as a primary care practitioner, when I am treating an infection in pregnancy, what all I should know? Any acute or chronic infection may be contracted in pregnancy and lactation, and not just TORCH. We are all focused on TORCH, but any other infection can come, or in a accidental pregnancy, conception may occur in a woman already having an infection, and that becomes imperative for us to treat. Fortunately for us and for pregnant patients, most infections are not more common in pregnancy. They occur with same frequency. They are also not more serious or sinister in pregnancy than in non-pregnant. But that small percentage which are potential to turn into complication, we have to be on a high alert for any infection, however innocuous, in every pregnant or lactating patient. Infections and fevers in the would-be mothers or mothers, I will talking of pregnancy and lactation, should be treated just like any other serious illness. It has to be considered that yes, this can give problems. What should be our concerns? The effect of any infection on the pregnancy or the fetus depends on the extent of temperature rise. So, infections which give rise to higher fevers like typhoid fever or UTIs, or maybe in certain locations hyperthermia, they can be more dangerous. The duration of what the fever lasts. So, attempt should be made to bring the patient down to optimum pyrexics level and the stage of the fetal development. Mild exposures during pre-implantation period can give rise to embryonic and fetal development problems, or severe exposure during embryonic and fetal development. Means pre-implantation, even mild exposure can be dangerous, but in the later phases, severe exposure is required to cause miscarriage, premature labor, growth retardation, and or stillbirth. First trimester infections disrupt organogenesis, as we know that is the trimester when organs are being formed, whereas second and third trimester infections can cause neurological impairment or growth disturbances, IUGR. So our concern should be in those pregnant women who get a specific disease, we should think, and if we are not aware, we should search textbooks, talk to a friend, how frequently does the offending organism reach the fetus or has the potential of crossing the placental barrier. In those women who get that specific disease, how frequently does the treatment given reach the fetus? So it is not only the infection that can harm the fetus, even the treatment given can harm the fetus. So, many of us always have that double dilemma. I should avoid that drug. But then by avoiding the drug, you are leaving the fetus exposed to the infection. So, which is worse, you have to decide. Because many of the drug safety will tell you can be used if benefits outweigh the risk. So if you have the risk more of the infection affecting the fetus, might as well take some risk in giving the medication. With what frequency does the microorganism or the drug given seriously and permanently affect the fetus? So this knowledge is a must. And I will show you in between our website Indian Doctors Guide, where you can get all this information. And very soon we are going to come out with a mobile app which will give you all this information at the tip of a finger. We have been told from the time of our studies, prevention is better than cure. That is why the first lecture of the series was taken by Alka ma'am on preconception planning. If a couple is planning pregnancy, what all tests you can do to make sure you are not bothered about some serious infection in the pregnancy. Basic test. If you are planning somebody's pregnancy, first thing you have to do is rubella IgG. If negative, you rubella vaccine. Then the minute pregnancy is confirmed, you should do torch, toxo, rubella, CMV, herpes 1 and 2, both IgG, IgM. IgM will tell you whether the infection is current. Talk to the gynecologist whether the treatment is required or termination is required. IgG raised means the protection is available. At the first reporting of pregnancy, CBC, fasting blood sugar, TSH, 3H, HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, you may not do then unless you have a reason to suspect. Otherwise, 3H and VDR also can be done at the same time. So let's understand some infections and what are their effects on the fetus. UTI per se does not cause any problem in the fetus. It does not infect the fetus. But UTI in pregnancy has a higher chance of causing pyelonephritis. So pyelonephritis occurring in a pregnant woman increases the risk of termination of pregnancy and the risk that pregnancy will not be able to carry to term. Similarly, pneumonia, influenza, the ordinary flu, and hepatitis do not infect the fetus, but if maternal infection is severe, then it can affect the continuation of pregnancy. Chorioamnionitis. If there is chorioamnionitis, that can cause septic abortion and sepsis and death of the child. That is why septic abortion. Toxoplasmosis, cytomegalovirus, rubella and syphilis. These are all silent illnesses. They do not have clinical features. Unless in a immunocompromised patient you may get features. All of these four give some form of the congenital disease in the children. I will not go into detail, but you have to be worried that any of this present, we have to take a call. Should we terminate the pregnancy or should we treat based with the joint consultation with the gynecologist? Gonorrhea, although not so common now, if occurs in mother during pregnancy, causes disseminated infection in child. Salmonella typhoid crosses placenta and has a potential of causing fetal death. It has been reported on autopsy of the stillborn children that salmonella was found in the blood. So typhoid fever is one thing which we have to worry about if it occurs in pregnancy. Listeria is not a very common condition here. It is a foodborne illness. It causes miscarriage if it occurs in first trimester. Because see, when we have a patient coming to us saying that they ate some unhygienic food and they fell sick, we never bother to do culture. We never bother to find out the organism. For us, it is acute gastroenteritis. But then if it is listeriosis, miscarriage in the first trimester, and if it occurs in the last trimester, mother is at risk, premature labor, low birth weight children, or infant death. Now, infections in the mother and problems in neonatal period. Herpes virus can give neonatal infection, especially if happening around the third trimester. Group B streptococci can cause sepsis or meningitis in the neonates. Gonorrhea in the last trimester can cause ophthalmia neonatorum. In a normal delivery, if there is vaginal yeast colonization, the child will get thrush in the neonatal period. And tuberculosis, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, go through the placenta and can give adult type of tuberculosis in the newborn child. We know that the child tuberculosis is called primary complex, but if the mother has tuberculosis, she contracts during the pregnancy and the child can get adult type of tuberculosis. So child should be screened immediately. What are the infections which are common in pregnancy? Poliomyelitis, I have struck it out because polio has been eradicated. Oculogenital infection, infection of the genital tract and the eye by Chlamydia trachomatis. Herpes simplex virus type 2 infection, sexually transmitted, you will get genital herpes. Patient will complain of genital sores. Gonorrhea again has been on the decline. Vulvovaginal candidiasis. Pyelonephritis, because we saw that UTI in pregnant women has a higher propensity of giving pyelonephritis. And septic shock apparently occur more frequently in pregnant women than in non-pregnant women. Vaginitis, as we said, yeast colonization, especially by Candida albicans, occurs more frequently in pregnant women and the incidence increases with gestational age. So risk is lower in first trimester, higher in second and still higher in third trimester. It does not usually present severe problem for the mother or fetus. Mother may not get too much of symptoms. On examination, it is found symptoms could be distressing, mild to severe itching, discharge, pain, swelling of the vulva, erythema and ulceration. Fortunately, it clears up spontaneously in the mother after delivery. It is more in diabetic patients or patients with gestational diabetes mellitus and requires treatment for long period. Leaving these specialized infections, what occurs for the primary care practitioner like us, upper respiratory infection, URI, is the most commonly reported infection during pregnancy. Estimated 49.6% of women in United States affected at some point during periconception and pregnancy. India statistics not available, but you can be certain that the percentage, if not higher, is at least 50%. So we are the first point connection, first point doctors to treat this URI, and we have to be very careful. Most URIs are self-limiting infections, most commonly caused by viruses, including rhinoviruses, coronaviruses, and influenza viruses. When I say coronaviruses, I do not mean the current coronavirus. I am sure you all know, and even we discussed in our last few webinars back, coronavirus have been there in the world almost decades or centuries back. They are very innocent viruses. This is a novel coronavirus. So these are the colds which we get and then they go away even if we don't take any active treatment. And influenza virus. Then URI may take several positions or several presentations. A patient may present with rhinitis. A patient may present with sinusitis. A patient may present with pharyngitis. Or patient may present with laryngitis. Or just acute URTI, all of these combined, lot of fever, lot of congestion, lot of running nose, lot of lacrimation of eyes, red eyes. Looking at the patient, you know it's a viral condition. How to treat? Hydration is most important. Every fever, the patient has a bitter test. So the normal water intake of 2.5 to 3 liters goes down. Patient feels extremely fatigued, and our patients, even if thermometer does not show, they feel fatigued, they feel feverish, they will pop up paracetamol, which you have to prevent. So when you have a pregnant patient coming to you, or any patient coming to you who's of reproductive age, you better ask when was the last period. This question, the patient will tell you, no sir, I am 6 weeks pregnant, I am 4 weeks pregnant. Or if the LMP has been in last 2 weeks, then you are relaxed. Steam inhalation, because although there is lot of running nose, basically it is the congestion in the nasal passages. So steam inhalation gives the moist feeling. All these congestions dry out the mucus. Moistness is required. That is where plain steam inhalation, using Vicks or Carvol actually can do the reverse effect over the long term. Paracetamol, for severe inflammation, ceratopeptidase may be given with due concern. Why due concern? It has not been reported to have any teratogenic effects. But as we say that in a pregnant woman, everything is to be given with due concern. Antihistaminics to avoid, as it dries up secretions and patient actually suffers more. Exposure to Montelukast if a patient is a case of chronic sinusitis during pregnancy does not appear to increase the risk of major malformation above usual 1 to 3% baseline. So in general population, without any infection or drugs, 1 to 3% pregnancies get malformation. Using Montelukast does not increase that. So if a patient is on long-term Montelukast because of her chronic sinusitis, then that may be continued. Please, I have not written here, charting of temperature is very important because you should be aware of what is the highest peak that is going, and we should not allow fever to cross 102 in a pregnant woman. Oral decongestants in first trimester. Now, most of the patients are used to taking decongestant like Crocin Cold or Sinarest, Vicoril. These are now common names. But please understand, they can be harmful. Phenylephrine has been shown to have endocardial cushion defect in pregnant women, especially in first trimester. Phenylpropanolamine, ear defects and pyloric stenosis. Pseudoephedrine, fortunately, it is not available now frequently, although banned, but some of the unknown cough syrups may contain that. This has the potentiality of giving ventricular septal defect. Paracetamol is safe, but all these decongestants in second and third trimester are safe. So they can be safely given decongestant. So the treatment mainstay remains paracetamol, hydration, supportive treatment, inhalation, lot of warm liquid, soups, that kind of a thing. Maybe you can give vitamin C, maybe you can give some multivitamin. Take them, pull them for 3 to 4 days. Keep monitoring always. If you feel that the fevers are not behaving like a proper viral upper respiratory infection, then definitely go in for investigation. Acute febrile illness in a pregnant woman. So you'll have a patient which can be divided into 2 groups with localizing signs, evidence of likely pathology. Then you treat as per the pathology. What are the common ones? Acute appendicitis. We'll be covering next week systemic diseases or other these things, inflammations. Acute cholecystitis, acute hepatitis, acute gastroenteritis, urinary tract infection, fever with meningeal signs, or vaginitis with fever. If the patient has localizing sign, your diagnosis is clear, you may confirm with some test and then do the treatment accordingly. Other group is without localizing signs, no evidence of likely pathology, just fever, feeling chilly, body ache, backache. Feeling chilly, they actually don't have chills. ठंडी जैसा लगता है. They are not shivering, they are not trembling. So that is again a very specific question. When patient says ठंडी लगता है, we have to ask, are you trembling? Are your teeth chattering? Is it uncontrolled shivering? Then they say, no, I just feel cold. I feel like covering. Temperature charting is a must. Antipyretics like paracetamol only. Hydration again. Nutrition. Most of the patients do not consume food. They feel, I'll vomit. They feel like vomiting. Here I have to worry that the nutrition should be going in enough for the mother and the child. So I have to coax them into foods which are nutritive, fruits, juices, soups, eggs, salads, vegetables, may not have chapati rice, may not have cereals, but other nutritive things must be taken, and a good support of multivitamins. After 24 hours of fever, if just looking at the fever pattern not helping, then let's get into some investigation. The first investigation, CBC plus minus CRP. Today, I would do a CRP. Otherwise, I would not do CRP as the first test in a fever patient. Routine test, sterile and midstream sample of urine. SOS culture antibiotic sensitivity. In my talk on urine examination interpretation, I had explained about sterile urine. Many of you may not be there that time, so I'll explain again. Most of the contaminated urine is because the urine before it comes to the container touches the skin surrounding it. More chances of contamination in a female. So for a male, sterile sample should be, if the male is not circumcised, retract the prepuce, wash the glands, and then urine should go directly into the container without touching the prepuce. For a female, it is little more tedious. They have to collect the sample without the sample touching the vagina and vulva. So they have to actually, if they have an English toilet, then they have to stand with 1 foot on the commode, try to separate the vaginal lips and collect the sample, midstream sample in the container. If they're using Indian toilet, that sitting position is enough for them to give a sterile sample. Why sterile sample is required? Because this is the time I do not want to give any antibiotics unnecessarily, because I may land up causing more problems. But if I don't give and there is a genuine infection, I am increasing the risk of pyelonephritis. Then, if still after 48 hours not better, based on the symptoms and signs, test for malaria. When you're asking for malaria, ask for parasite index, because Alkamem will tell you malaria very commonly leads to abortion. Parasite index, there are certain labs which give parasite index. One lab that I know is SRL, which by default gives. So understand one thing, parasite index about 2% is significant. That means 2% RBCs have plasmodium within them. If you send a patient, we all feel that sending a patient to municipal hospital, they never get admitted. But I believe me, patient going to this hospital and your note saying parasite index 2.5, they will admit without any of this thing. And parasite index above 5% is critical. Patient may die also. So always request the pathologist to give you a parasite index for malaria if it is positive. And this will be only possible when you are doing a smear for MP. It is not possible in doing IgM. Test for dengue, ask for all three, IgM, IgG and NS1. Because if IgG is positive, with IgM positive, this is secondary infection. Secondary infection of dengue has a higher chance of turning into dengue hemorrhagic fever or dengue shock syndrome. Leptospirosis, chikungunya, based on what you suspect, should not ask for all the tests. Chest X-ray, ultrasound abdomen, plus minus pelvis if indicated. Chest X-ray with proper protection of the abdomen with a shield. H1N1 if indicated. If your symptoms are suggestive, extreme coryza, very high fever and SpO2 dropping, then you can ask for it. H1N1 I will cover because although WHO has said that H1N1 has been eradicated, we are still finding cases of H1N1 and all cases need not be admitted and H1N1 can be treated by the family physician. If the patient has only URTI, no pneumonia, oseltamivir 75 mg twice a day for 5 days. If patient continues to be symptomatic at day 5, you can give the same medicine for 10 days. If there is pneumonia on X-ray but there is no tachypnea, oseltamivir 150 mg BD for 10 days. If there is pneumonia on X-ray, patient has tachypnea plus minus ventilator, then oseltamivir 150, of course this patient has to go to hospital, and zanamivir 10 mg BD for 10 days. Multi-organ dysfunction, titrate dosage as per creatinine clearance. Persistent chest X-ray shadow more than 10 days. Zanamivir 10 mg BD for 21 days. Vaccination, Vaxigrip, Influvac, these are trivalent vaccines or Vaxiflu 4 quadrivalent vaccine. They should be given prior to pregnancy. For others symptoms, you just give saline drops. You'll ask me the safety of this drug. Although the drug crosses placenta, there is no evidence of teratogenicity in first trimester. According to US CDC, it is preferred for treatment of pregnant women with suspected confirmed influenza. It should be used during pregnancy only if the benefit outweighs the risk to the fetus, as H1N1 influenza is more harmful to the fetus than oseltamivir. It is safe in lactation, this as well as zanamivir. Chikungunya, we know that virus transmitted by mosquitoes appears seldom to harm infants of mothers infected early in pregnancy, do not affect the fetus. But knowing chikungunya, our biggest problem is control of pain. It can frequently cause serious problems, including lasting brain injury in babies born to mothers who get this nearer delivery. So, chikungunya in a pregnant woman around 8 to 9 months is to be considered very critical, and special monitoring of the baby should be done. Diagnosis by IgM or PCR. Treatment paracetamol, gentle exercises. You cannot give any NSAIDs. In second trimester, you may try giving something, but then generally avoid. Some doctors like to give in lactation period HCQ, but then HCQ is associated with ophthalmologic and ear toxicity in fetus, would also result in increased fetal malformation. So even that is to be avoided. Actually, it is going to be a problem for us to treat a patient of chikungunya with knowing the amount of pain that the disease gives. Enteric fever. As I had said initially, Salmonella crosses placental barrier and in some cases can cause abortion despite early diagnosis and prompt treatment with right antibiotics. Do not depend on Vidal. Ask for blood clot culture and treat accordingly. Stool culture is not so reliable. Confirmation should be by culture only. You can do IgM typhi, but then treatment selection should be by culture. Amoxicillin, clavulanic acid, and third generation cephalosporins, ceftriaxone, cefoproxamine, and cefixime, 14-day course. Some physicians administer immunoglobulins if infection is severe because we do not want to lose the child. Today, every pregnancy is precious. Typhoid in last trimester can lead to neonatal typhoid because it travels, crosses the placenta, gives hyperthermia. So, instruction to the family, whether in first trimester or last trimester, not to allow fever to go high, not to give too much of paracetamol, go with tepid sponging or even full water sponging. Look out, common complications of typhoid in pregnancy are typhoid ulcer perforation and cholecystitis. Consider preconception vaccine. See, as a primary care doctor, it's our job to think for the patient. So in my clinic, every patient of mine who enters 10th is given a typhoid vaccine because the vaccine validity is 3 years. So I tell the parents, I am ensuring that for 2 board exams, 10th and 12th, child will not get typhoid and will not have to lose exam. And believe me, that word of mouth, now patient just come in and say, my child is entering 10th, just past 9, we want to take typhoid vaccine. Similarly, in a patient who's planning pregnancy, please consider preconception vaccine. There's a question about 3H. 3H is a common acronym used for hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and HIV. Hepatitis C test. See, it is Government of India has mandated these 3 tests in the antenatal period. Whether you do it in the first trimester or as soon as you know of pregnancy or do in the end, it is better always to do in the first, because then if you have any positive results that surprise you, then you can take measures. You can start treatment or you can abort the child. Alkamem will tell you, even if you have HIV positive in first trimester, you can continue the pregnancy and almost ensure a non-HIV positive baby. Hepatitis C test also is required in normal pregnancy. I think every pregnancy is normal pregnancy only after you have ruled out any risk factors. Parasitic index in pregnancy, I am saying, see, as a practitioner, I always look for parasitic index in day-to-day practice also. But in pregnancy, it is more important. You should ask for it so that you can identify your patient who's likely to go into major complication due to malaria. You can identify due to parasitic index and take action. But parasitic index will always help you in practice also, because see, I have said 2-3 times during these webinars, I am repeating it again. Almost 30 years or maybe 30 years ago, I attended a lecture of Dr. Amdekar, a pediatrician, who said that every time you are sending a child back after having examined, ask yourself, can this child die in next 24 hours? I use that thing for every adult patient also, because we treat chest pains, we treat a lot of conditions. In a pregnant woman, always ask, if I am sending this patient home, will this infection or this fever affect her adversely or the fetus? Chikungunya, IgG not required. We only want to do IgM just to know current infection. Rubella antibodies, okay, I'll repeat it. Rubella is the commonest cause of first trimester abortion. It is a silent infection. So when you are planning a pregnancy, you should check for rubella IgG. I want to be sure my patient has protection against rubella. If the IgG is negative, then I give rubella vaccine so that the patient gets protection. I do not do IgM that time. I only do IgG. I want to check protection. I'm not worried of acute infection. Oral typhoid vaccine available, but it's better to give injectable. But oral and injectable both are not recommended during pregnancy because oral is live, no. Typhoid treatment, oral or 2 drugs, no, 1 drug is okay, but you have to give sufficient dosage as per the body weight and minimum 14 days. In a non-pregnant woman, if you are treating typhoid, I would advise that after the course of typhoid is over, after 1 month, give a shot of typhoid vaccine so that you avoid a relapse. Okay, I will now log out. Alka ma'am will join. Any more questions you can write to us and we will be more than happy to answer. Rohan, please start.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I'll be discussing some of the infections during pregnancy. Now, before I discuss, let me share my experience with you. This is when I was working in JJ Hospital, so must be about 10 years back. A 26-year-old primi gravida, she was 5 months pregnant. She was having fever with rigors. In private setup, she was diagnosed as P-Vivax positive. Now the dilemma was regarding antimalarials. Because antimalarials, as you know, are toxic to the fetus, and therefore the treating doctor gave her doxycycline only. 3 days later, the patient came to JJ Hospital with altered sensorium. She developed seizures, and therefore when we did the neuroimaging, we found that she had cerebral venous thrombosis, which is a known complication of malaria. Now, why this happened? If she would have been treated properly, this complication wouldn't have occurred. But even in the city of Mumbai, the gynecologist or the treating doctor had this dilemma, and therefore patient had increased morbidity. Another example really shocked me. Now, this couple was known to me. Both of them were PhDs working in a very good institute. And one Sunday, I get a call at home because these people knew me. And they said, we want to come and see you urgently. I said, why on Sunday? On Monday you come to JJ. So they said, no, madam, please spare some time, but we'll come home. And please spare some time for us. So they came. The story was, this lady was 32 years old, female patient. They had come for the opinion. The story goes like this. 6 years ago, this lady, for the first time conceived, 3 months pregnancy, she had fever with rigors. She was diagnosed as malaria, treated with chloroquine by her gynecologist. And because she was treated with chloroquine, the gynecologist advised her MTP. So the first child sacrificed, MTP done. 1.5 years later, unfortunately, the lady had ectopic pregnancy. So tubectomy done. So 1 tube gone, second child gone. 1 year later, she missed a period. They were very happy that now she has conceived. Urine pregnancy test was positive. As luck could have it, after 2 months, she developed a cervical lymph node, which was tubercular, and therefore MTP was done. I was shocked that this is happening in Mumbai. But the climax is still later. Now, when 3 children were lost like this, now the couple was so anxious to have a baby, and they were going from pillar to post. They were going from, doctor shopping, going from this obstetrician to that obstetrician. Every time, all battery of investigations done for husband and wife, and both the people were absolutely normal. Then one obstetrician carried out Manto's test, and Manto was naturally positive, as you all know. So because the Mantu was positive, the obstetrician in the city of Mumbai told her that you had tuberculosis, you were treated, and now you have Mantu positive. So this is MDR TB. My God. I mean, how can you make a diagnosis of MDR TB on the basis of Mantu positivity? And therefore, naturally being educated people, they were so worried, and she started crying so bitterly. I told her, don't worry, this is not MDR at all. All the reports are normal. What you have to do is stop going to the doctors, be relaxed. One day or the other you will conceive, but whenever you have relations, don't have that tension. I assure you, you will conceive, but then be relaxed, don't take the tension. And today they have 8 years old son. She conceived maybe 1 year later or so, but the reassurance only helped her. There was nothing wrong, but just imagine 3 children gone. Now it is a precious pregnancy, and you declare MDR TB on the basis of Mantu test. Because this was happening in Mumbai, I said it is necessary that we have to update our doctors about this infections during pregnancy. Now, when we talk about pregnancy, last time also I told you, we are worried about the mother, we are worried about the obstetric outcome, and we are worried about the fetus or the newborn. Now, remember Hippocratic dictum that when there is a question, whom will you say, mother or the fetus? Mother gets the precedence over the fetus. If the mother survives, she can produce another child. But if you have to sacrifice the mother, everything is over. Okay? So it is ethical dilemma. Please don't go into the dilemma. It is mother who gets the precedence when such a dilemma comes over all other things. Now, why we are worried about infections during pregnancy? Because apart from all other things, the mother's health, the fetal health, there is also a chance of vertical transmission. Now, in first trimester, organogenesis is taking place. You call it as embryogenesis, or from embryo, now various organs are being developed, and these organs are developed, between 4 and 12 weeks. And therefore, when these organs are being developed, the maximum fetal malformations occur during the 4th to the 12th week. Okay, and therefore it is this period that we have to be very, very careful. We don't want to interfere with the organogenesis, and therefore even a layman knows that पहले 3 महीना कोई भी दवा नहीं लेने की, लेकिन पहले 3 महीने में अगर कुछ डायलेमा है, then we have to treat, no doubt. I'll come to that. But remember, organogenesis takes place between 4th and 12th week, and therefore minimum medicines, unless it is a must. In second trimester, there is a transmission of something like syphilis, which has now become more or less uncommon. And in the third trimester, now the fetus has almost developed. There are least malformations because the organs have already developed, but there is maximum transmissibility of infection. So maximum infections are transmitted in the third trimester. So in the first trimester, minimum interference, unless it is a must. We have to weigh the benefit and the risk and then treat the mother, no doubt about it. But remember, organogenesis in first trimester, and therefore don't go on giving. No one should keep on giving drugs unnecessarily. What are the routes of this transmission, vertical transmission from mother to child? It is in utero. As the child is growing in the uterus, through placenta it can go. Perinatal, and even after birth, the infections can be transmitted through breastfeeding. Postnatal period, immediately postnatal period, when the child is passing through the birth canal, it can get neonatal meningitis, neonatal sepsis, neonatal pneumonia, E. coli infection, strepto infections, Listeria, granulomatous infant septicum, genital herpes, hepatitis B, and HIV as the child is passing through the vaginal canal. So remember, at all stages, there is always a risk of infection being transmitted from the mother to the child, and therefore we have to treat the infection in the mother. Why the mothers are so vulnerable for infections? Because there is a suppression of cell-mediated immunity during pregnancy. I will make it very, very simple so as to understand. See, when a fetus is growing in the mother with all the cells which are developing, isn't fetus a foreign body? And when the foreign body is developing in your body, naturally the body may react and develop antibodies and may kill the child. But the nature is great, the God is great, and therefore the child is not treated as foreign. And therefore there is a suppression of cell-mediated immunity in the mother. There are also immune suppressive fetal products. These are substances produced by the trophoblast which block the maternal recognition of fetal major histocompatibility antigens. Okay, and that is how the fetus is protected and the fetus is growing in the womb. But what is happening on the other side? Because the cell-mediated immunity of the mother is suppressed, and if she is not taking proper care of her nutrition and all other factors, that she is vulnerable for infection. Then we talk about drug safety in pregnancy. Now, you know, all the drugs when they come to the market or before the FDA gives them the certificate, all these drugs are tested for safety in pregnancy. All the drugs are not safe. So first they are tried in the animals, then there are clinical trials, and lastly they are also trying, there are randomized control studies in the pregnancy. And these drugs are categorized as follows. Remember this, category A, these are control studies in pregnant women showed no risk. These are category A. Now there are so many ethical dilemmas when we want to try the drugs in the pregnant woman that we have to be sure that in the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, there was no risk at all. And then only we can do this. Sometimes you are treating a patient and you can take it as a study objective and then see, and therefore the drugs which have showed no risk are called as category A. Category B is adequate human studies are not done. Animal studies have showed some risk. So when we talk to the patient, we have to say all this, that there are no adequate human studies, but FDA has approved this as category B. That means we have to take some calculated risk. It may be 1 to 2%, but then it is there. But then there is no choice. We have to treat the disease. So always see the risk-benefit ratio. Category C, risk cannot be ruled out. See, in the category B, I didn't talk about the risk. I said some animal studies have shown some risk. But category C, risk cannot be ruled out. Category D, positive evidence of risk from if the mother gets the drug, the child will have this. You all remember the case of thalidomide. Thalidomide without proper control, it was a wonderful drug. Today we are using it for myeloma. But this thalidomide without proper control studies was marketed hurriedly, and then we had all those thalidomide teratogenic children. And category X, contraindicated in pregnancy. So when you get any drug insert, please read the pregnancy risk, and they will be categorized as A, B, C, D, and X. Now let me talk about some common antibiotics that we are going to use for infections. And remember, penicillin, the synthetic penicillins also, they are category B. Still we are using them because it is, we have to treat the mother or infection. So penicillin is B. Get conversant or get used to or stick to 1 or 2 antibiotics which you are very confident and use them. Penicillins are category B. Macrolides, erythromycin and all the other congeners, they are B. Cephalosporins are B, and carbapenems are also B. Chloramphenicol, C, not to be used. Quinolones like nalidixic acid, not to be used. Fluoroquinolones, cifran, ofloxacin, moxifloxacin, C, not to be used. Tetracycline, definitely not to be used. It is D. Now, amongst the tetracyclines nowadays, it has become absolute. Nobody is using, but we are using doxycycline. Doxycycline has shown much safety compared to all other tetracycline, but doxycycline in one collected report has shown that 0.01% risk of fetal risk. So doxycycline also, as far as possible during pregnancy, can be avoided. But amongst the tetracycline, that is the safest. Don't use tetracycline. So no fluoroquinolones, no quinolones, no chloromycetin, but penicillins and all the semi-synthetic, synthetic penicillin, macrolides and cephalosporins can be safely used during pregnancy. Now coming to the common problems like pneumonia. CAP is community acquired pneumonia. It is caused by bacteria, Streptopneumoniae, H. influenzae, Legionella, Mycoplasma. Viral, varicella and influenza. And now all of you must be itching to write corona, but corona pneumonia, yes, there is a pneumonia and the pathogenesis is still not very well understood. Maybe next time when I am talking, I will include corona. Fungal infections like PCP, cryptococcal pneumonia and coccidioidomycosis. Now fungal infections, fungal pneumonias are usually in the immune compromised people. So it may be like diabetic mother or it may be HIV positive mother, but otherwise immune competent mother will not get this. Then we go by curve score. And for a curve score, remember CORB curve. If the patient, for each of this, you give 1 point. So if there is a confusion, patient is confused, 1 point. Urea is more than 7 millimoles per liter, so 1 point. Respiratory rate is more than 30, so that means there is a tachypnea. And blood pressure is less than 90/60, that means person is going into a shock. So if we give 1 point to each, and then we see the score, so if the score is 1, we can treat the patient on the outpatient basis. That means patient is not serious, we can treat him with antibiotics, he'll recover. If the score is 2, the patient has to be hospitalized. And if the score is more than 3, the patient needs intensive care management. Community acquired pneumonia in the pregnant woman, the clinical course will remain the same. Organisms are same. Drugs are beta-lactams and macrolides. Quinolones not to be used. Now, extended spectrum beta-lactams, there is an inadequate safety studies, but if the patient has, in ICU, is going into a shock, then even beta-lactam plus are used. But otherwise, beta-lactams, macrolides are safe. Coming to dengue, it's very common now. Monitor hemoglobin and hematocrit, platelet count. Now, if there is a dengue, what are the complications in the mother? Preeclampsia is more common, eclampsia is more common, premature birth, stillbirth, and fetal infection. Now, if the person comes with dengue, reassure the patient. We will take care of the patient, but also tell them that the course of the disease is such that it may cause some of these problems like preeclampsia, premature birth, and you should be prepared so that when any of these things occur, they should not come and beat the doctor. So when the patient comes, we have to monitor the hemoglobin. More important is hematocrit. So if the hematocrit, that means if there is a hemo concentration, hemoglobin is increasing, the hematocrit is increasing, PCV is going high, it is 48, 50, 52, 60, that means the plasma is oozing out. There is a hemo concentration and the platelet count is dropping. So we have to keep the hematocrit in normal range. Therefore, hydration is very important. If the hydration oral fluid intake is less, then we can give intravenous fluids. there is, the formally we have been discussed in various books. You can refer to that. So hydration is important, and platelet transfusion during labor. Otherwise, postpartum hemorrhage may precipitate. Even in the neonate, immediately do the platelet count, and if it is low, the platelet transfusion should be given. As such, for dengue, we don't have any antidote or anti-treatment, and therefore it is a supportive care, but the supportive care has to be timely, and therefore monitor hematocrit, platelet count, enough of adequate fluids, and platelet transfusion as and when necessary. Not for each and every patient. When the platelet count goes below 20,000, the transfusion should be given. Urinary tract infections are more common in pregnancy. More common is asymptomatic bacteria. The same microbes like E. coli and all. Their beta-lactam should be used. Quinolones should be avoided. Sulfonamides are teratogenic. Nowadays, nobody uses, but by mistake, if you are using Septran also, it's teratogenic. So please don't use. Quinolones not to be used. Beta-lactam plus can be used, particularly if the mother is diabetic. Asymptomatic bacteriuria, the urine is almost normal, no pus cells, but the culture shows persistent infection. So persistence of actively multiplying bacteria without symptoms. Here we give antimicrobials for 7 days. Whatever sensitivity is, give a full course, and then we can treat the patient with urinary antiseptic, particularly nitrofurantoin, which is quite safe and should be given for 21 days, or you can continue 100 milligram OD or BD throughout the pregnancy. Coming to tuberculosis, whenever there is a tuberculosis, we have to do the following test: sputum for AFP. Now you will ask me, there is a TB lymph node, and why we should do sputum for AFP? Because there is something called as a latent TB. Secondly, there may be pulmonary TB along with a lymph node TB. Both have remained, pulmonary TB remained asymptomatic, was not picked up. Lymph node appeared, and therefore we picked up. So sputum AFP has to be done. I have written AFP culture sensitivity. This is an old slide, but now we do Gene Expert. Of course, AFP culture sensitivity is still a gold standard. Okay, so we can do that. Nowadays, we do the rapid culture, BACTEC culture, but even with BACTEC culture, we also do the traditional Lowenstein-Jensen media, and we take 6 weeks AFB culture. Every TB patient should be tested for HIV. This is government guideline. Also do fasting blood sugar, or if necessary, if there is a strong family history, then do hemoglobin HbA1c. This is only to rule out diabetes, because TB is again very common in diabetes, and take X-ray chest using a shield. Okay. What is the treatment? Now, just because there is a TB, there is no indication for MTB. We can treat TB very safely. Only thing nowadays, we do the Gene Expert to find out that it is rifampicin sensitive. Rifampicin is the last drug in the first line of treatment, and therefore, if there is a rifampicin resistance, we take it as MDR TB. And therefore, whatever is the specimen, if it is lymph node aspirate, if it is a sputum, then you please do Gene Expert. You get the results within 6 hours that it is rifampicin sensitive. Start the first line treatment. In the first trimester, do not use pyrazinamide. So it should be Isonex, rifampicin, and ethambutol. So first trimester HRE. If it happens in second trimester, we can use HREZ. So after first trimester, when the lady goes into second, continue with HREZ if indicated. Otherwise, only HR goes on. Pyridoxine to be given. Now, when we are giving ethambutol, now remember this, what I have said in first trimester, if you started HRE we are giving the induction phase for 2 months. And next 4 months, it will be H and R. In the second trimester, if TB is detected, then HREZ. Okay. And then after 2 months of induction, we give only HR. Along with that, pyridoxine to prevent the neurotoxicity. Now, when the patient is receiving ethambutol, most important thing is monitor the visual acuity and color vision. The first side effect of ethambutol will be that the patient starts seeing halos of green and orange color. If the patient is seeing such halos, that the patient is developing visual complication and ethambutol should be withdrawn. Streptomycin to be strictly avoided because this causes deafness in the child. Breastfeeding by a tubercular mother, breastfeeding can be continued. But remember, when the child is put to the breast, whatever type of tuberculosis, there is always some latent pulmonary TB, and therefore INH prophylaxis to the infant has to be given for 3 months. INH prophylaxis, okay? And when the child is on INH prophylaxis, there is no use giving BCG vaccination. So BCG vaccination is to be postponed after the INH prophylaxis. So breastfeeding can be continued, INH prophylaxis to the infant, and BCG vaccine is to be postponed. Now MDR-TB, gene probes have come, or gene expert confirm, but still confirmed by culture. But if there is a MDR-TB, the second line anti-TB drugs have severe fetal toxicity. Please explain to the patient and the patient's families that it is MDR-TB, which is also a risk for the family members and more so to the fetus, because all the drugs are toxic to the fetus, and therefore patient should be counseled for therapeutic abortion. So in this case, you can consult, you can take the second opinion of a pulmonologist, also talk to the obstetrician and decide about therapeutic abortion in case of mother having MDR-TB. And as you know, MDR-TB is increasing in India. Coming to malaria, more than 45 million women become pregnant per year in the malaria endemic area. Of these 45 million, more than 30 million are in sub-Saharan Africa. Malaria is so common there. It causes maternal anemia, no doubt. It impairs the fetal growth, causes miscarriages, stillbirths, premature birth, and IUGR. Please remember these, so that if a mother comes with malaria, we have to tell them the malaria per se will have an effect on the fetus, for which doctor is not responsible. Okay, so these will be the effects on the fetus, that impaired fetal growth, miscarriages, stillbirth. So tomorrow she should not say, because you gave me quinine and therefore there was a miscarriage, because you did this and the stillbirth occurred. No, this is primarily a complication of malaria, and that should be informed to the patient. Plus, there is placental parasitemia. So the parasites are going to the placenta. They cause RBC lysis, maternal anemia, IUGR, and 75,000 to 2 lakh infant deaths each year due to malarial infection during pregnancy. Please remember some of these figures so that you can tell your pregnant woman that this is already happening because of malaria and not because of therapy. But therapy has to be given to the mother, otherwise both mother also will be sick, and these complications in the fetus are going to occur. Management of malaria, we always have some doubts about the antimalarial. Quinine is oxytocic. Higher doses of quinine causes organ malformations, but we are not using higher doses. It can cause 8 nerve hypoplasia. It can cause limb anomalies. Depending on the type of malaria, chloroquine is safest. But unfortunately, all our falciparum malaria is chloroquine resistant malaria. Even Vivax is now becoming chloroquine resistant. And in these cases, quinine is indicated. Now a new drug is there on the horizon. We are all using it day in and day out, and that is artesunate. Artesunate to be used, but adequate data on safety is not yet available. But amongst all these drugs, artesunate is better and can be used during pregnancy. Now, like rifampicin, artesunate is the last drug added to our armamentarium, and therefore In order to avoid artemisinin resistance, we have to use artesunate or artemisinin compounds along with some other drug. So this is called as a artemisinin combination therapy or ACT, which is approved by FDA. So artemether lumefantrine 20 milligram plus 120 milligram, artesunate amodiaquine. Now this is a big table. I have given it in my book, but in any books you can see these references, and therefore it has to be artemisinin combination therapy that is to be given. If you are giving a single therapy in the first trimester, what we can use quinine, we can use chloroquine, we can use clindamycin. Because there is no adequate safety data, I have not included artemisinin in the first trimester. In the second and third trimester, we can use artemisinin combination therapy plus clindamycin for 7 days, or even artesunate monotherapy for 7 days. In lactating women, tetracyclines are contraindicated. Please don't use doxycycline also. And primaquine is not to be given either to the mother or even postnatally to the mother or to the child, because we do not know the G6PD status of the child, and therefore by giving primaquine we may cause hemolysis in the child. So don't give primaquine to anyone, but you can use ACT plus clindamycin, artesunate, tetracycline contraindicated, primaquine not to be given. Coming to hepatitis A, hepatitis E are waterborne. Hepatitis B and C, they are, their routes of transmission. Therefore, preconception counseling is very, very important. And wherever vaccination is available, we should give the vaccination. So we can give hepatitis A vaccine, we can give hepatitis B vaccine, so that the mother is protected. What is the vertical transmission of these two viruses? If it is HBV, it is 10 to 20% transmitted to the fetus. HCV 5%. If HCV and HIV are combined, then it is 14 to 40%, and HIV alone, there is a 30% vertical transmission. Antepartum management. Now, if the mother is found to be having hepatitis B or hepatitis C, avoid hepatotoxic drugs. We have to observe all the biosafety measures, otherwise we may get the infection. We have to tell the mother, abstain from alcohol because it is again hepatotoxic. Counseling for vertical transmission, tell the mother that this will be vertically transmitted to the child and these are the chances. However, there is no indication for MTP. I'll come to this when I discuss HBV. Non-invasive techniques for screening. Please avoid amniocentesis and avoid puncturing of the placenta, because this will directly give infection to the fetus. What is the HBV perinatal transmission? If the mother is only HBs AG positive, then it is 10 to 20%. If it is HBs AG positive, plus if it is E antigen positive, the transmission is 90%. And therefore, I told you the importance of preconception counseling. So if the mother is found to be HBs AG positive, today we can treat them. We have drugs available, we can treat them, we can control their viral load, and then we can ask them to go for a conception, so that at least vertical transmission is reduced. And it is reduced, it is never negated. So because it is reduced, we can take a chance, and then in any of these cases, we have to keep hepatitis B immunoglobulins ready as soon as the child is born. So when the child is born, we give the passive immunization with hepatitis B immunoglobulin 1 to 2 ml intramuscularly within first 24 hours. But if it is a HIV positive patient, we have to give it immediately after the birth. Okay, and HBV vaccine is to be started to the fetus within 12 hours. So passive and active immunization of the child. Hepatitis C infection, risk factors are IV drug users, history of transfusion. Now we are taking all care in our blood banks to test for HBV, HBC, but still, you know how scrupulous our people are. Sometimes all sorts of accidents occur in our in our blood banks. So be careful. So history of transfusion, abnormal liver enzymes. If the person is recipient of organ transplant, nowadays organ transplantation is increasing even in our country, and therefore if there is a history of this, hepatitis C can be passively transmitted to the recipient through organ transplant. So therefore do anti-HCV antibody and see whether the person has developed antibodies, that means he is exposed. Then do the HCV RNA. If the HCV RNA is less than 10⁶, then there is a low risk of transmission. But if it is more, if the HCV RNA is positive, then there is an increased risk. And in this case, again, this is a second example where we should advise therapeutic abortion. HIV infection, it is a government guideline that all the pregnant mothers to be offered HIV test. Of course, we have to counsel them and get their HIV test done. If seropositive, send for CD4. But irrespective of CD4, we have to start treatment to the mother. CD4 may be more than 500. She is positive. There is going to be a transmission to the child, and that is why we want to treat the patient so that at least the child will be HIV negative. Now, embryogenesis is taking place in the first 4 to 12 weeks. If possible, we can wait. If the mother is already on ART, continue ART. But if there is, the mother comes in 6 weeks or 10 weeks pregnancy, then we can wait for 4 to 8 weeks, and then we can start the C combination ARV. The ARV which is given is tenofovir, lamivudine, and efavirenz. Some years back, we were not giving efavirenz, we were giving nevirapine. But with nevirapine, we found that there was immediate resistance both in the mother and the child. And therefore, nowadays we give efavirenz as found to be safe. So, tenofovir, lamivudine, efavirenz as a treatment irrespective of CD4, and that is to be continued even after the delivery, so that even the breastfeeding period is covered. So all HIV infected mothers have to be started on treatment the moment they are detected to be positive. Now, if there is a maternal regimen, antenatal, intranatal, postnatal is tenofovir, 3-TC and efavirenz. In all these scenarios, and if the mother is HIV-1 positive, then the infant gets daily nevirapine from birth to 6 weeks of age, irrespective of mode of feeding. Whether you are breastfeeding, top feeding, but still the child has to get nevirapine syrup. I have given the dose less than 2 kg, 2 milligram per kg, 2 to 2.5 kg, the baby. Then it is 10 milligram, and more than 2.5 kg, it is 15 milligram. Nowadays, another thing that we do, that is on the 3rd day, we send the child's blood for our DNA PCR. If the child is infected, because previously DNA PCR was not available, and therefore we had to wait for 18 months to get HIV ELISA done. So now we do the DNA PCR, and if the DNA PCR of the child is positive, then we start the treatment even for the child. So immediately you can refer the patient to any of the ART centers and start the treatment. Okay. If it is HIV-2 infection, nevirapine has no action on HIV-2. Even efavirenz has no action on HIV-2. So efavirenz we are giving for HIV-1. For HIV-2, it is zidovudine, lamivudine, 1 tablet twice a day, plus ritonavir boosted lopinavir, 2 tablets BD. Okay, so it is NRTI plus protease inhibitors which are given. And for the baby, we don't give nevirapine because it is not going to have action. So we give AZT serum, zidovudine serum. Vaccinations during pregnancy, as I discussed last time also, hepatitis A is produced from inactivated virus. Therefore, theoretical risk to the fetus is low. But therefore, I said that preconception counseling is so important that we can give this all before conception. Here I am saying theoretical risk is low, but I cannot rule it out. HBV, it is recombinant DNA technology, no risk, therefore can be given. MMR not to be administered. But nowadays I think MMR has been included in the IAP guidelines. So all children are getting MMR. If they have not received, then only we'll have to worry that, but that cannot be given during pregnancy. Varicella not to be administered. BCG is not recommended during pregnancy. Okay, and now lastly comes corona. I don't know because as yet we have not fully understood the pathogenesis of corona, that is SARS-CoV-2 virus. Coronaviruses are known since 1968, but this new virus or novel corona or SARS-CoV-2 virus, the pathogenesis is, we are still understanding it. Every day there is something new which is unfolding. As one of the physicians, probably a frustrated physician, said that except pregnancy and fracture, everything is possible with SARS-CoV-2. So all sorts of manifestations are there. But hopefully we are waiting for corona vaccine to come. And when the vaccine comes, we will decide how it is to be given, whom to be given and all that. But I'm very proud of my resident doctors who are working as warriors and fighting this corona epidemic, and they have delivered in every hospital. Nair, I think, has the maximum, but they have delivered corona positive women and have given birth to absolutely most of them are healthy babies. So my doctors have conducted the deliveries of COVID positive patients. Also, I congratulate them, and all of us should take courage and learn these things from our juniors. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, please send them. Next time we will try to address them. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Your appreciation really inspires us to do more and more of this work. This is all academic and we enjoy it. Thank you very much.